You will lack nothing. Say this prayer and feel peace. The old chapel stood at the edge of town where the streetlights flickered and died, leaving only darkness and the whisper of wind through broken windows. Most people avoided it after sunset. They said strange things happened there, shadows that moved wrong, voices that called your name when no one was around. But Sarah didn't believe in superstitions. She believed in desperation. She pushed open the heavy wooden door, its hinges screaming in protest. The sound echoed through the empty space, bouncing off stone walls that had witnessed a century of prayers. Moonlight filtered through the stained glass, casting colors across the dusty pews, red like blood, blue like bruises, yellow like old bone. Sarah's footsteps echoed as she walked down the center aisle. Her hands trembled, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. On it, written in her grandmother's shaky handwriting, was a prayer. Not just any prayer, the prayer that had supposedly saved her family for generations. The one you said when you had nothing left to lose. You will lack nothing, her grandmother had whispered on her deathbed, pressing the paper into Sarah's palm. Say these words when the darkness comes, but remember, child, every prayer has a price. Sarah hadn't understood then. She'd been young, foolish, thinking she'd never need such desperate measures. But that was before she lost her job, before the medical bills piled up, before her daughter got sick, so sick that the doctors just shook their heads and talked about making her comfortable, before she realized that sometimes faith isn't about believing in miracles. It's about having nowhere else to turn. She knelt before the altar, the cold stone biting through her jeans. The chapel felt alive somehow, watching her with invisible eyes. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper than they should be, and the air tasted like copper and old incense. Sarah unfolded the paper with shaking hands. The words were simple, written in Portuguese first, then translated to English in her grandmother's careful script. Lord of the endless night and boundless day, I come before you, stripped of pride, with empty hands and breaking heart. Fill what is hollow, mend what is shattered, provide what is needed. I ask not for riches, but for peace, not for glory, but for grace, not for plenty, but for enough. You will lack nothing, you promised. I claim that promise now, in darkness and in light, in fear. And in faith, I surrender all. So be it. She began to read, her voice barely a whisper at first. The words felt strange on her tongue, heavy with meaning she couldn't quite grasp. As she spoke, the temperature in the chapel seemed to drop. Her breath came out in visible puffs, like smoke. Lord of the endless night and boundless day. The candles on the altar flickered to life, though no one had lit them. Sarah's heart hammered, but she kept reading. She'd come too far to stop now. I come before you, stripped of pride. Something moved in the shadows behind the altar. Sarah's voice faltered, but she forced herself to continue. Her daughter's face flashed through her mind, pale and thin, lying in that hospital bed, machines beeping, keeping her tethered to life by threads. With empty hands and breaking heart. The movement in the shadows took shape. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, stepped into the colored moonlight. It wore robes that seemed to be made of darkness itself, shifting and flowing like liquid shadow. Where its face should have been, there was only a void, but Sarah felt it watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Fill what is hollow. Mend what is shattered. Go on. The figure said, its voice like wind through a graveyard, like the rustling of dry leaves, like whispers from a grave. You've come this far. Finish it. Sarah wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to drop the paper and flee into the night. But she thought of Emma, her little girl, who still believed her mother could fix anything. Emma, who'd whispered, "I'm scared, Mommy," in the dark hours before dawn. Emma, who was running out of time. Provide what is needed, Sarah continued, her voice stronger now, defiant. I ask not for riches, but for peace. The figure moved closer, gliding across the floor without walking. The darkness around it seemed to pulse and breathe. More shapes emerged from the shadows, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, filling the Mao chapel with their cold presence. Not for glory, but for grace. Not for plenty, but for enough. Do you understand what you're asking? The figure whispered, now standing directly before her. Peace comes at a cost. Grace must be earned. Nothing is truly enough. Sarah looked up into that empty void where a face should be. She thought about her grandmother, who'd lived to be 97, who'd never wanted for anything, who died peacefully in her sleep with a smile on her face. She thought about the other women in her family, great-grandmothers and great-great-grandmothers, all the way back, who'd prospered when they should have suffered, who'd survived when they should have perished. You will lack nothing. You promised, Sarah said, her voice ringing through the chapel. I claim that promise now. The figure tilted its head, and Sarah heard something that might have been laughter, cold and ancient. The old compact, it said. Your bloodline remembers. Very well. In darkness and in light, Sarah continued, standing now, facing the entity without fear. In fear and in faith, I surrender all. Surrender, the figure repeated. Do you know what that word means? What you're giving up? I surrender my fear, Sarah said. I surrender my pride. I surrender my doubt. But I will not surrender my daughter. The chapel fell silent. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. The shadows drew closer, pressing in from all sides. Sarah felt their cold touch on her skin, felt them reaching into her, searching, testing. So be it, she whispered, completing the prayer. The world exploded into light and darkness, swirling together like oil and water, like day and night colliding. Sarah felt herself falling, or flying, or both. Images flashed through her mind, her grandmother as a young woman, standing in this same chapel speaking these same words. Her great-grandmother before that, and her great-great-grandmother, all the way back through the centuries, an unbroken chain of women who'd stood in darkness and demanded light. The price they'd paid, the compact they'd made. You will lack nothing, the voices whispered, a chorus of the dead and the ancient and the things that had never been alive at all. But nothing comes from nothing. What you receive, you must give. What you take, you must return. This is the balance. This is the price. Sarah found herself back in the chapel, kneeling on the cold stone floor. The figure was gone. The shadows had retreated to their corners. The candles on the altar burned steady and true. But something had changed. She could feel it in her bones, in her blood, in the very rhythm of her heartbeat. A connection, ancient and terrible and beautiful. A debt, acknowledged and accepted. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. With trembling hands, she pulled it out. A message from the hospital. Emma's fever broke. Doctors can't explain it, but all her numbers are improving. You should come see her. She's asking for you. Sarah's tears fell onto the phone screen, blurring the words. Relief flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. Emma was going to be okay. She was going to live. Thank you, Sarah whispered to the empty chapel. Don't thank us yet, a voice replied from the shadows. The payment is due, not today, not tomorrow, but someday. When we call, you must answer. That is the compact. That is the price your grandmother paid and her grandmother before her. What will you ask of me? Sarah said, her joy tempered now by understanding. The same thing we asked of them all, the voice said, fading now, retreating. To stand in darkness for another. To speak the words when someone else has nowhere else to turn. To be the answer to someone's desperate prayer. You will lack nothing, but you will give everything when the time comes. This is the way it has always been. The chapel was silent again. Truly silent now. Empty. But Sarah understood. Her grandmother's peaceful death, her prosperity. It hadn't been luck. It had been payment for standing in the darkness for someone else, for being the answer to prayers. Sarah stood, folded the paper carefully, and put it back in her pocket. She walked down the aisle, past the pews that had seen so many desperate souls, so many final prayers. At the door, she paused and looked back. "I accept," she said to the empty space. "When you call, I'll answer." The door closed behind her with a soft click. The candles on the altar burned a little, brighter, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And in those shadows, if you looked carefully, you might have seen the shapes of women, dozens of them, hundreds, thousands, all the way back through time. Women who'd knelt in darkness and demanded light. Women who'd made the compact and paid the price. Women who would lack nothing because they'd been willing to give everything. Sarah walked home through the dark streets. The streetlights flickered back to life as she passed. By the time she reached the hospital, dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Emma was awake, smiling. Her color returned. "Mommy," she said, reaching out her small hand. "I had the strangest dream. There were angels in my room, but they looked like shadows, and they said you saved me." Sarah took her daughter's hand, held it tight, and smiled through her tears. "Not angels, baby. Just someone keeping a very old promise." She stayed with Emma as the morning light filled the room, chasing away the shadows. But Sarah knew the darkness would return. It always did. And when it came for someone else, when another desperate soul knelt in that chapel and spoke those ancient words, she would be there. She would be the answer. That was the price of peace. That was the cost of never lacking anything. And Sarah had accepted it willingly, completely, and without regret. Because some prayers are answered in darkness, and some blessings come with teeth,